Is 20mm the new 24? This focal length is now far more common than ever before for both primes and zooms. But is 18mm the better option for photographers? When shooting wider than wide, does it make a difference to buy an extra few millimeters of perspective? I love the 18mm perspective. One of my favorite old lenses from my DSLR days was the compact and gorgeous Zeiss 18mm f3.5. It's incredibly sharp and delivers amazing detail on a 50 megapixel sensor. It's not especially fast at f3.5, and the vignetting into the corners makes it unappealing for astrophotography. It also has a unique wavy distortion pattern that requires correction in posts, which shows up most clearly when shooting straight lines of architecture or interiors. This proved to be a headache for me, given the random bugs thrown up by Capture One and its lens correction tool. And if you don't have a simple way to correct the distortion in your lens, this one is not the one you want to be shooting with. For many years, the world of 18mm was left on my shelf, until the LUMIX S5 18mm f1.8 came along. It's only the last 6 months that I've had a chance to work with this lens properly, and it's become a standard piece of kit for my travel photography. I like a good wide angle lens, and at 18mm we're nudging the edges of ultra wide. Minimal distortion, maximum flexibility, great autofocus performance, and that sweet f1.8 bokeh. Even at 18mm you can work some bokeh. Getting any bokeh from a wide angle is not always straightforward, but there are times when you can really hammer that foreground hard and let the background turn to silk. I liked being back in the 18mm world, and it reminded me of what I've been missing. For a decade now, my standard kit when traveling in the Himalayas was a 50mm and a 24mm prime, nothing else. That combination would get me 95% of the shots that I wanted. As a tour leader, I often sometimes have to let go of that other 5% in order to travel light and just be more available to my companions on tour. 24mm was my go-to lens for wide for over a decade, because in the days of DSLR, a 24mm f1.4 was the widest you could go and still shoot that fast. The next option was usually f2.8, and for most things, f2.8 doesn't really excite me. That's not fast enough. Today, we have immense choice in that space between wide and ultra-wide. Not only are 18mm f1.8 primes a thing now, but 20mm primes and zooms are all over the market this year. Sigma make a 20mm f2 that is an absolute gem. It's so small, so solid, so fast. Years ago, I took their 20mm f1.4, a big lens. I took that to Bhutan and I loved it. But it is a big lens, it's kind of heavy, and the curved glass at the front makes working with filters a little bit difficult. If it was half the size, I totally would have ditched that 24mm 1.4 in favour of that. But the two lenses were very different. Micro Four Thirds cameras have another unique option that has to be thrown into this mix, the LUMIX 10 to 25mm f1.7. It's a zoom lens that gives effectively 20 to 50mm, but at f1.7 right the way through the range. It's gorgeous. 20mm instead of 24mm, that was really nice. In the days before COVID, I did one trip to Nepal with this lens and I never found myself trimming back on the zoom. I always maxed it out as wide as I could go. When I want wide, I want wide. This zoom was great for times when I needed a 50mm perspective or maybe a 35 and I didn't need to swap out a lens to achieve that. That's luxury. I'm not used to having such a powerful shallow focus plus the benefits of a zoom. In the world of full frame, you don't get like a 20 to 50 that'll do f2 right through the range. Not yet. I'm hoping that'll change. In the meantime, I'm heading to Nepal to test out both the Sigma 20mm f2 and Tamron's 20 to 40mm 2.8 zoom. So that's 20 to 40, 2.8 right through the range. The Tamron is not as fast as what I'm used to, but it's so light and it's full frame. It's a compelling bit of kit and sells for a song. It's so cheap. Even if you're a die-hard prime addict like myself, a lens like this is a must-have as a backup in case something happens to one of your other lenses. It's super easy to pack and it might save you bacon one day. I won't get into the argument right now about f2.8 versus f2 between the prime lens and that Tamron zoom. That's for a totally different blog post. The question I'm really asking myself at this stage is, will 20mm be wide enough, or will I simply find myself lamenting the difference between a fast 20mm and a fast 18mm? That's where the jam is. There are times when even an 18mm is just not wide enough. Aurora photography in the Arctic is an addictive pursuit for landscape photographers. And at 18mm, the dancing sky can give you moments that are just too immense and too wide to capture. In reality, an Aurora lens is a dedicated bit of kit and not just something you shoot with whatever other wide lens you happen to already own. Auroras are not a reason to buy 18mm instead of 20 because it's just not wide enough. You need to be stepping out to 14 at f2.8 or ideally faster. It's rare that an 18mm lens gives you significantly more joy than a 20mm. It does happen, but not often. The difference between 24 and 20, that's chalk and cheese. I absolutely recommend you get a 20mm over a 24. There are loads of times for me when 24mm just isn't wide enough. For landscape things, I often will use a 24 to do a panoramic shoot where I shoot that frame and I stitch it back together later. That's one way to get around it. Or you can carry a wider lens. Sigma's little 20mm f2 is an amazing bit of kit to hold in your hand. It feels so solid and packs away so small. I get much more attached to lenses than I do cameras, and this one I might find hard to put down. It's an ideal lens for very, very small camera bodies. If you have a very small camera body and it looks ridiculous when you put a great big chunky lens on it, then something like the Sigma 20mm f.2 is absolutely what you need to look at. Expect to see a lot of photos coming through on my Mastodon account from the Himalayas in the months to come, and many of them captured at 20mm. Some will be on the Sigma, some of them will be on the Tamron, and we'll see which ones spark the most joy for me. What you won't see much of on this trip is 24mm or 18. Those guys are resting at home, snug on the shelf and taking a little break from duties. It's no doubt that shopping for lenses is always a nightmare. There is no perfect lens and everything is a compromise of some sort. Weight, price, speed, price, zoom, price. The best lenses are usually those dedicated to specific tasks. Auroras on a 14mm lens is marvelous. Birds on an 800mm lens are marvelous. Butterflies on a 105mm f2.8 macro are marvelous. For everything else, a wide and a standard prime are marvelous kit to have on you. And when I say wide, I don't mean 24mm. That's not wide enough. But 20mm, that's pretty darn good. Please hit the like button, please subscribe, and I hope you have a great day.